Okay, and you see something similar here. China has emerged as a major kind of manufacturing hub, and then you have the United States. Okay, but if you look at least developed countries, in particular South Asia and Africa have very, very low levels of industrialization. Africa has stagnated at very low levels of industrialization, and the growth in South Asia has been very, very low. So South Asia and Africa show up as regions which have not really industrialized. Now, facing current account deficit. So when you have a situation where you're importing goods and you don't have your own industrialization, you are not able to export, creates a situation where low-income countries are pushed into a vicious cycle of high-cost borrowing. And this has emerged as a major global crisis as we speak. Now, if you look at this map, okay, all the countries in the red are countries with very, very high levels of debt. In fact, it's quite unbelievable. This country with very sort of deep red is Mozambique. Can you imagine what is this level of debt stock? Mozambique's debt stock in 2022 was 350% of its GDP. What does that mean? It basically means that if the entire population of GDP slogs away, and whatever value addition they have, whatever they produce, they keep exporting everything that they produce. Okay? It will take them 4 years of slogging to be able to get rid of the debts they have accumulated. Now, this is nothing but national debt slavery. We used to hear about debt bondage and debt slavery, but here you have debt slavery at the national scale, where countries after country has had to impose economic policies, fiscal austerity on its people, which has meant that the wages are kept depressed, which has meant that people work, but whatever they do is extracted in the forms of profits and taxes, and used to repay debt. Used to repay debt to Global North, to repay debt to financial institutions, but not just that. What has become important is that you now have huge amount of debt that's owed to private non-guaranteed bonds. So you basically have global capital which is lending to countries, and basically countries are enslaved by global capital. And you have a situation where country after country is forced to basically part with a large part of its GDP to service the debt. Several countries are debt trapped, and a large part of their income is spent and national assets are liquidated for servicing international debt. If you look at the debt service ratio, look at the amount of debt service they're doing. So now Mozambique would basically be like 40% of their GDP goes to service the debt, which basically means that people work, and that money, half of that, the value that they're creating is taken out to service debt. Now, a lot of this debt is not just owned to countries of the North and to IMF or ADB, etc., but actually also to private bondholders, because countries that have become, unfit for lending by international finance institutions are forced to turn to private bondholders to raise money, and that basically means that they get indebted and debt trapped towards private bondholders. So that's the kind of situation that has arisen. Now, the policy responses are ineffective or even compound the crisis. So the IMF forces you to devalue your currency, forces fiscal austerity, the inflation shoots through the roof, the private bondholders seldom basically refuse to take the haircut, and the structural roots of the debt crisis are not addressed. So basically, you basically are forced to borrow more to repay the debt, which means that you further and further get trapped under the burden of that debt. So that's the nature of crisis, when you have essentially compromised the economic uh, capabilities of countries in the global south, where they have not been able to industrialize, they are not able to manufacture, they are not able to produce high value services, and are forced to essentially live out of the raw materials and natural resources, the minerals they can mine, agricultural produce that they can export for consumption in the global north, becomes the only way the country, becomes the only economic country's activity that survives in the country. You have a situation where these countries basically become debt trapped to global finance capital, and therefore then become their national sovereignty is compromised and so on. Now in this, on top of this come the emerging challenge. Then you have the new challenges. So you have a COVID pandemic, you have climate change, which means that the global south has to not only deal with existing problems, existing challenges of development, existing situation of inability to meet the requirements of the basic requirements of its people. They also have to deal with these emerging challenges such as the COVID pandemic and climate change. Now, if you look at the estimates of climate finance requirement, you have something like $5,000 billion. You're talking of almost $6 trillion USD is estimated to be the finance that's required for dealing with climate change. And this is supposed to be a huge underestimation, because a lot of countries in the global south are simply unable to estimate how much do they need, particularly for adaptation. So if you have floods, if you have droughts, what do you need to cope with it is something that a lot of countries in the global south are simply unable to estimate. So they just leave it blank. They don't know how much it will cost. Despite that, basically the UNFCCC estimates show that about $6 trillion at the least, and almost $9 trillion if you look at what countries have communicated as overall requirements, is what they need for dealing with climate finance. Now, in comparison to this, what is the level of finance that's being made available? Okay, this is the estimates of UNFC Standing Committee on Finance, basically talking of $600 billion, $623 billion. So less than 10% of what is said to be required has been mobilized. But this also is a huge overstatement, because you basically any economic activity which has any bearing on global finance, which you may be doing in the natural course of work, okay, is now considered part of this. So this includes a lot of spending that countries do anyway to support agriculture, to support farmers, to support social security schemes. Everything is put into this. So this is not incremental finance. This is not additional finance that has been mobilized. This is everything that's supposed to have any bearing on climate change, is supposed to help you cope with climate change, is counted here. Now, if you look at total funds pledged, okay, for global environment facility, all that you have is 25 billion. And of that, a very small amount is actually disbursed. Only $9 billion are actually disbursed. Okay, we're talking of $6 trillion. $6 to $9 trillion is what you need, and all that's been disbursed is on $9 billion. So, the scale is just so ridiculously low. There's a huge gap between even what is approved and what is disbursed. Okay. Now, this staggering gap between the needs and availability of finance for developing countries to meet these new challenges, the gap is hugely understated in data because of underestimation of needs and overstatement of availability, and the economic constraints developing countries are faced with limit the prospects of domestic mobility. I mean, the developing countries can't mobilize resources for these additional challenges. They are struggling to mobilize resources even for the problems that they historically faced. Okay, and there is no way that they can mobilize additional resources for these new challenges. So basically you have a situation where vast masses of people in less developed countries just face the heat. They are exposed to deprivation. They are exposed to lack of access to the most basic amenities that anybody in 21st century should be having. But and on top of that, they are exposed to the new crises that come up as a result of historically as a result of a lot of what has been done in the global north. So that's essentially the sort of broad framework of what I would like to present. But I'm happy to take questions to this if there are any. Thanks.
Yes, the floor is open for discussion. Anybody who have a question can please raise your hand. In case anybody is having technical difficulty in using the mic, you please send in a message. I will read out the question as well. Yes, Samik.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Sir, just one second. Can you? There's an echo going on. Can you mute it?
Yes.
Yeah. Hello.
Yes.
So, good morning, sir. So first of all, I'm Shomik Sharkar from VISH, from VITAP University. First of all, thank you so much for this enlightening discussion on this global capital and the neoliberal order that we can see today. So basically, I have two small questions which may be very much interrelated. First of all, sir, regarding the what you have said that under the neoliberal order, the sovereignty of the states are very much compromised. That's very true. So regarding this, my question is a little bit from the practical perspective that if there is any political change in any state, say for example, there is a left party or any communist party comes in power, or there is a tendency to come in power, immediately the share market will crash and the global will make the political party, the state come to its knees. So we are so much dependent on the foreign capital that immediately they can make the share market crash and the state will be unable to function. So in that case, even democratically, if any alternative party wants to come in power that can challenge the neoliberal order, how is when we are talking about this indebtedness and how the southern countries are unable to finance their own thing, my question is this: then how do we understand China here? Because sometimes China's relationship with Sri Lanka or Bangladesh also seems like that, where China is giving loans and the countries like Bangladesh or Sri Lanka, they are being very much being dependent on China. Though we of the neoliberal order, maybe like that. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Should we take all the questions, or do you want me to respond while
maybe 1 to couple questions, then we can respond and then we'll wait.
Okay.
Yeah. Hello, sir. Thank you so much for your presentation. Yeah, what you mentioned, sir, is very true. I mean, but then you also mentioned that there are some structural adjustments programs which are kind of not met. So what can we do about it? Like, for example, how do like the structural adjustment programs impact the less developed countries? SAPs are often imposed by financial institutions and required countries to implement policies like reducing public expenditure, privatizing state-owned entities. So how does a country or a less developed country come out of it? Like Mozambique, for example, the example that you gave, which was really red in that whole picture. So how do they come out over the years? Like, yeah, basically that is what I would want. Yeah, thank you.
Sir, please go ahead and we'll.
Yeah. No, so I think that, in fact, the questions raised by Shomik and Tanmay, the first question of Shomik and the question by Tanmay are similar. I mean, what do countries do? I mean, if a country tries to do anything, the global finance flies away. Or, I mean, how does Mozambique deal with this? I mean, I really think the analogy of debt slavery is very important here. How does a slave free himself? A slave doesn't free himself by fighting alone. Okay. Similarly, Mozambique cannot battle this alone. I mean, the point is that this requires global South to get together and battle global finance together and fight this out together. It requires the solidarity of less developed countries to both deal with specific situations that some of these countries are facing, but also to basically change the larger international finance order. Demand that this international finance order be changed. Battle this at the level of on the global fora is extremely important. The other is that they have to strive to create their own capacity. The problem is that right now a lot of countries are not even striving to industrialize, are not even trying to industrialize. I mean, the governments of these countries are as neoliberal as the global finance institutions. They have their own neoliberal policy makers who collude with. Now, so there is also a need to wage struggles within the country and pressurize the countries to take positions against this. Right now we have a situation where, frankly, a lot of world leaders are simply sold out. They're sold out to the finance capital. Now, the need for people in the global South to forge solidarities and resist this is extremely important. Now, what about China? Now, I think China, both is a problem and an opportunity. China also, has in some ways weakened the unipolarity of global finance. So it also it creates an opportunity. It creates somewhat of an opportunity. This is not to say that Chinese finance capital is not seeking profit, but it has at least created an alternative avenue for countries in the global South to seek support from. So, how one uses that opportunity, what becomes of it, really depends on the strength and solidarity that less developed countries are able to forge. Are you able to use both your own national resources, your own national what can be done internally, as well as the international institutions that are available to you, international fora that are available to you, to be able to create pressure on global finance capital to not be exploitative in the way it is. Now, that's a battle, that's a struggle that needs to be fought at different levels, both within countries and at international fora. Unfortunately, it's still too weak, and I don't see Global South fighting this battle together collectively against the global finance capital. But that really seems to be the way to deal with it.
Just to yeah, Tanmay.
Yes, sir. But then, sir, I mean, can you, sir, at least let us, I mean, can you show us, or maybe kind of chalk out any South-South cooperation, sorry, that has been successful as of now to, let's say, bring about some development in the global South, to bring them out of this particular vicious debt circle? Like, are there any evidences still now? I'm not
No,
able to think of it.
historically, of course, there were. No, I mean, after all, many post-colonial countries did establish trajectories to do their own development. I mean, India, 1960s, 70s, 50s, 60s.
He froze?
So yeah, some technical glitch.
Yeah.
So 1 more minute, I think. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I think I was disconnected.
Yeah.
No, I was saying that even in India, for example, and this is something that by and large happened in many developing countries, Latin America, all over Latin America, or in fact even countries in other countries in Asia. I mean, the countries have at different moments in the history, or China for that matter, countries in the Soviet bloc, and had created ways of independent having independent trajectories of industrialization and development, and in that cooperation across countries was hugely important. I mean, support from other countries was a huge thing. But the point is that, are you even trying to do that? I mean, that whole Nehruvian phase in India was a phase in which country was trying to develop. It was trying to create domestic capacity for manufacturing to achieve food self-sufficiency, to set up steel plants, to set up power generation capacity, to set up fertilizer plants. The country was doing that, and it was doing it with a specific, as part of a specific plan for development. Now the problem is that under the whole neoliberal order, which has not only been imposed from the global north, it's also been sold to the global south. So you have your own people who don't believe in the possibility that the country can actually create its own capacity. Now, you see, India is still a large country. It is had a certain level of development. You go to countries in Africa, I mean, they're completely, they have no manufacturing base at all. They have, their peasants have simply no money to even cultivate, except by borrowing, except by having contracts with companies who will provide them seeds and fertilizer and everything to produce what the companies want to buy. So you have a situation where in the most basic things cannot be done without financial support and investment from the north. So that situation is a result of the fact that the national leaderships have compromised, have become part of this project of the global north to do this, and you're not even trying to unfortunately, you don't even strive to ensure that people of the country have access to basic services, basic healthcare, their incomes are improved, and the minimum wages are provided, and so on. So that's unfortunately the situation.
Yes, sir. Actually, I was just thinking like the Latin America's case. The Latin America, they are coming up with their own currency and they are challenging against the thing like recently also. So that might be seen as an alternative to that thing. But again, as you have said, like Latin American countries are small and they have many similarities between themselves, amongst themselves. But talking about India and other countries, India has so much of disparities and diversities within itself, and also because of the historical regions, different historical relations and other things. So we don't have good relationships with that is some due to some diplomatic reasons also with our neighbors also. So maybe it is becoming very difficult to challenge against that. And one more thing I really like that you say that this is not only something the global north is saying, but it is selling to the global south, and the global south is accepting that as their own theory. That is like hegemony. They are accepting that.
Absolutely.
So we need to fight against that hegemony itself.
Like, of course, absolutely. I completely agree. Yeah, absolutely.
In that case, do you think in the part of this neoliberal order only, but you have these alternative formations like BRICS? Do you think that will they be able to provide a challenge at least, or at least a countermeasure to this? And second, in the starting of this neoliberal order, we have seen them getting into these countries, changing even their political structures, political government, so on and so forth. So do you think there is a need for this global finance now, or is it still continue doing it?
You see, the point is that formations such as BRICS, what happens to them, what role do they play, depends on whether the role they play is determined only by the leaders of these countries or by its people. I mean, if the leaders of these countries drive the agenda of BRICS, you know where it's going to go. I mean, if you have South Africa, you have India, you know, they'll basically pander to the global finance. If on the other hand, pressure is created from below, from the people of these countries, to force their leadership to serve the interests of their people, then of course, I mean, these formations will serve the role that it depends. I mean, can these formations be made to serve the role, the interests of the people? Yes, they can be. Will there be? Well, the history will tell us.
We might have. We'll wait for a last question if anybody wants to add or wants to.
I'm going to have to run because I have a class.
Then I end it here. So thank you very much. Professor Vikas Rawal was very busy today. He has other engagements, but still, since he has promised us earlier, he made time. So we have asked him to reschedule it, change it. In spite of all of it, he has accepted or acceded to all of our requests.
Thank you for adjusting to the schedule for me. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much for participating in this. I also thank all the other participants. Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.